It is Wednesday at 3 p.m., and that means it is time for Sell Like a CPCU. How'd you like the new intro, Precious?
Oh, man, that's awesome. I was like, here we go already innovating and upgrading.
Yeah, I was worried a bomb might go off at the end of it. I'm glad that we escaped that. That was pretty good.
We did. We survived. That's a good thing. Unless it's a money explosion, then I might, be here for that. So
that is like long distance high five. I love that. That was like an alley oop. That was awesome. For anyone who is unaware, this is Sell Like a CPCU. My name is Matthew Struck. I am joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Precious Norman Walton. We are a offshoot of, or a program that is put together by the Agents and Brokers Interest Group, part of the overall CPCU Society. Our intent here is to give agents, brokers, anyone who's selling insurance or looking at selling insurance, some high-level advice, tools, tactics, techniques in order to be successful. Before we get rolling with our guest, please remember, like, subscribe, comment, share. We can take your comments and questions real time. So if anything is, pressing or something comes to mind while the broadcast is happening, please leave it in the comments and we'll try and get to it. If you watch this recording afterwards, still, please feel free to comment. We would love to have a conversation with you about what might come up with respect to this issue. So now that we're done with that, would you like to intro our special guest this week, Precious?
So of course, the beautiful thing about being part of the CPCU Society is that we've got members that work in all levels of the ecosystem here. And so this time of year, and with COVID and all the things that are going on, it's really important that agents and brokers, we serve as the front lines for the industry. And so we have a very special guest today, Ms. Judith Smalls. She is in the Houston, Texas area. She is the current president of the Houston chapter, for CPCU Society. And her specialty, and while we have her on, is really to talk about the awareness piece when it comes to fraud, in insurance claims. And so while agents and brokers, we don't necessarily handle the actual claims handling, there are a lot of things that, trends, and it's an entire enterprise. It just blows your mind, the criminal enterprise, right?
Yeah.
Literally how the evildoers make their living, right? And so as that front line, as that first line of defense, we as agents and brokers can inadvertently be pulled in, to some of this stuff, unbeknownst, unknowing. And so really having these eye-opening conversations really helps us overall to not only just personally be aware of what's going on so that we know how to react, but then also, just best practices and tips and suggestions that we can pass along to our clients of things that they can, kind of keep an eye out for so that they're not, caught up in situations that are seemingly innocent, but can have deeper implications. So with that, I guess, did you want to kind of share with us a little bit of your backstory and kind of how you got into doing what you do today?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So I've been in P&C, property and casualty insurance, for like well over 20 years. And primarily the focus of my career has been in the special investigative unit, focusing on insurance fraud and fraudulent activity. So I currently work for USAA, where I've been here for 2 years. And previous to that, worked for State Farm for many, many years. And primarily what I focus on now, my job is medical related insurance claims, questionable medical provider, questionable claims, staged accidents. That's pretty much the focus of what I do. But over the course of my career, pretty much done lots of different areas as it relates to insurance fraud.
Awesome. So, in terms of COVID, we were just kind of talking offline before we started rolling here. How is that really kind of, I think this might be a really big question to start off with, but how has COVID specifically kind of affected just your ability to do your job, first of all, in terms of kind of rooting out those, fraudulent claims or kind of like outsized, upscaled claims that really shouldn't be compensable or shouldn't be worth as much as folks say they are?
Well, like for me, the biggest thing that COVID did was kind of grounded us all, basically. So on the plus side, I think all carriers kind of have initially did have like a slowdown in claims, just simply because of no one's driving, no one's going anywhere. But you know how claims inventory works, and so just because I didn't have any claims moving forward didn't mean I didn't have any claims from the past that are still open and being investigated. And so
What, you didn't get to go on vacation?
Sit back and close the books and say, oh no. So, a lot of what we do is field-based work, going out, meeting people in person, conducting inspections of medical facilities and clinic inspections and watching activity and things like that. So we didn't have the ability to do that anymore, to see kind of what's going on at some of these questionable providers. Meeting people in person, that's always a better gauge of someone's credibility, how they're going to present to you in an interview, on how truthful do they seem, and then ultimately, if it's something that you're concerned about ending up in litigation, how do you think they're going to present as a witness? Those are all things that you try to ascertain in person. That's kind of hard to do now that we're doing everything with these virtual platforms. So that's created some obstacles and some limitations. When you're sitting in a room across from someone and you're asking questions about things and you're expecting them to be able to give you the information based on their memory, you have no idea of what information they may have access to. I mean, I'm sitting here right now, I've got, 3 monitors in front of me, and I can look at 2 or 3 of them, and you don't know what I'm looking at, what I'm reading from. And so all of those, from an investigative standpoint, create a hurdle for us to try to ascertain if someone's being truthful or if they're stretching the truth, or that's kind of been a big thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, because you can't tell who's in the room, who's reading the line.
Absolutely not.
What's happening behind the scenes. I think one of the things that probably surprised me the most with special investigations is that, I started my career on the agency side, and I've kind of come full circle, spent a little time in claims, spent a little time in underwriting. But I think our policyholders forget that the policy is a contract. And so there's obligations, for the insured to cooperate with, any sort of, claims investigation. And so, we used to get the calls in the agent's office, why are they asking these questions? Isn't this invasive? Is this going too far in? Do I have to have an obligation to respond? And, our answers are absolutely yes. You do. This is part of the, the process. This is part of what you've agreed to do. If you open up the policy, there's the insured and the insurer, and we all have responsibilities, under the policy. But I think that, my experience in claims introduced me to the concept of, even the NICB. Right. And so there's certain indicators, and this is a website that, anyone can access and look at and read through. It's not just enough to be suspicious, that there actually have to be documented. There's, protocol on what is a, kind of known to be a flag, for something that's out of line. And so that's kind of the tie-in, of course, why we have you here, is to kind of think through, especially when it comes to, some agencies, depending on who you represent, sometimes we take first notice of loss, sometimes we don't. Right. And so even from the onset, are there any, just again, not talking about any specific cases or anything, but things that an agent, should kind of be mindful of when they're talking to somebody about a loss or potential loss?
Yeah. Well, like one of the things in terms of that would be policy changes a lot of times. I think that that's an indicator if there's a particular coverage policy that's been added, coverage that's been added, deductibles being reduced, or just any type of expansion, anything that would support anything that would support an exposure increase that's now based on the loss that they're presenting will make you go, okay, I wonder if it's just a coincidence that they added this coverage, not long before they actually reported this loss. So I would think that as a person taking the first notice of loss, a lot of times you will have been aware that prior to that there was a policy change or a policy modification that might matter.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's something that we run into an issue with from time to time as brokers, especially with kind of becoming a little bit more, technology makes it a little bit easier, but it also makes it more difficult, right? So your service team isn't necessarily the same person taking the same service request from the same client all the time, right? So you have to be able to proactively go back through and look at those records, or if you're the producer, you're supposed to know your client, right? So if those really kind of odd things happen where it's like all of a sudden they have $1 million in $1 million inland marine rider that has to get added, and it's I'm gonna pick a very facetious example here, but like, oh, I have $1 million in gold bullion that I need to add onto my policy. That should obviously raise alarm bells, right? And I think you would probably agree with me, Precious. This also comes into the field of field underwriting as well, right? Like,
Absolutely.
You have to have a good, forgive my language, but a good BS filter when it comes to being a producer. Like, kind of ironic. You have to be able to sling BS, and at the same time, you have to be able to filter it as well, right? But so that being said, I think that's a really good point. Like the broker also has to kind of be aware of it quite often, the same way you would protect your own client, like more in the work comp realm. The same way you would protect your client, the business owner, by saying, this doesn't sound like it's a credible claim, or we should red flag this to make sure that, this is a VIP and we're making sure to dot our I's and cross our T's. The same can be said about when this stuff goes into the carrier, right? You're supposed to be an advocate for your client, but you're not just supposed to be an advocate for one client, you're supposed to be an advocate for all of your clients, right? And so if you have a track record of putting in fraudulent claims on the part of your clients, the other clients that aren't putting in fraudulent claims are being harmed indirectly. So I think that's something to remember. Judith, has COVID really kind of created a unique environment that would compel people to file fraudulent claims, or just given them more opportunity to get away with a fraudulent claim?
I think it's a combination of both, because you have to think about, first and foremost, what is the motivation of fraud is money. And so then you have to think about all of the circumstances and situations that people are in economically now. Some people, not everyone has the luxury, like we can, of working from home. Some people were not able to maintain their jobs depending on the industry that they worked in. And so now you have people that are facing economic struggles, which then creates the actual need to find a way to replace that money. And so anytime you have any type of economic challenge like that, that can always create a motive for someone to do something that they may not normally do. So I guess that's probably would be more an opportunistic type of fraud, I guess. The other thing too is this quick transition that we've had to do, just kind of everybody transferring, working from home, and not everybody getting up to speed, like from a technology standpoint quickly enough. It's kind of created some holes in terms of technology, and things like cybercrime and things like that are kind of on the rise because people are kind of attacking the vulnerabilities that companies have as far as like firewalls and security and things that they weren't able to necessarily get in place, you know what I mean, as early in the process. So that's another thing that has, had an effect on it.
So I think too that with social distancing, and I think a lot about kind of the vulnerable parts of our population, right? And so whereas you may have had somebody who had maybe a child or a grandchild that came by periodically, kind of help go through the mail, do things like that, with us being a little bit of out of pocket with one another too, when I think specifically in the as far as like medical things are concerned. I know that with my mother-in-law, she was a Medicare recipient. And so, the explanation of benefit documents would come in. And whenever I went by, we would just kind of sort through the paperwork and just eyeball it. Like, did you go to that appointment? Are these the things that happened while you were at that appointment? So that, I think, when you talked about, crimes of opportunity, especially like when it comes to medical providers, very, well, I would say seldom is it just outright where they just, someone who's not even in their practice and they found their number lying around, oftentimes
Right.
it's adding that happened, charge for tests that didn't occur, for treatments that never happened. But obviously, being, and I'm sure that you guys can relate, being that insurance person in the family, it's like
designated.
look at that when it comes by, But
you're the designated problem solver.
I am all things insurance. I'm like, that's not even, I don't even do that. And they're like, but you're the only one who could possibly read it and make sense of it, And so I know just firsthand from working with organizations that support like senior citizens that there's a big reluctance to come across as either forgetful or like not as independent, as they start to lose their independence. And so it's very humbling to say, hey, I got some paperwork in the mail. I don't remember this, but I don't want to say I don't remember this,
Exactly.
But with social distancing, especially, we're not even getting together for Thanksgiving this year,
right?
In most households. And so as we have these, the inability to get a second set of eyes in some cases, that kind of opens that door for the potential for, things to go wrong.
One of the things that we are learned about early on, because you mentioned the NICB. For those who don't know, it's the National Insurance Crime Bureau. And so most insurance companies, SIU personnel, typically like attend monthly meetings where we share information. They kind of give us information about fraud trends, and we discuss, ongoing investigations and things like that. Well, one of the big things early on was the targeting of seniors for these what they call COVID testing kits. And so this was early in the beginning of COVID, where our understanding of it was very limited. People were fearful. There was a lot of misinformation that was going around. And so the seniors were being targeted, with these COVID testing kits, and, they're contacting and misrepresenting who they are and where they're calling from. And these seniors were falling for it because they were afraid and they wanted to be tested and they were willing to pay for the test. And it was a scam to, get money, but also get their information. Like you said, Medicare, to other types, down the road when you have that information. It's just easy, kind of get away with that when we're in this vulnerable state, like, in the midst of COVID.
Yeah, that's I think that's interesting. It's or not interesting. I mean, it's just a fact of this is kind of like a large scale catastrophic claim, right? Like it's affecting the entire country. There's systemic risk associated with it, but almost inevitably you end up getting like whatever the reverse of ambulance chasers are, right? Like it's the anarchists and opportunists that are using that confusion and basically the fear, right, to get people's money when really they shouldn't be getting that money at all. I think that's also something where I'm not sure, like if you're a broker and you're being consulted for this, if you're say a personal lines broker and you're watching this and you're being consulted for these things, I mean, if it doesn't pass the smell test, right, if it doesn't pass the sniff test, there's probably something wrong with it, right? Yeah. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to be really logical about it. And look, I track it down, especially if you're so I don't know if we have a ton of these people in the CPC Society, but if you sell Medicare supplements or if you sell, let's see, what are some of the other ones out there? There's a handful of these kind of like, or if you do, elective insurance, like group elective insurance, right? That those types of coverages, say you do find something that's better, that's fantastic. But if you track those things down and you find out that they're junk or they're actually fraudulent, don't just tell your client not to do it, right? Protect the other clients that are out there that aren't currently paying you and report it, right? Is there a good way to report it, Judith? Is there kind of like I guess it depends on the state that you operate in, right?
Well, like you do have national organizations like, say, the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. Like they have a website that you can go to. You can sign up to be like get notices of like news alerts and things that they put out, and that's also a place where you can go where they actually do report on certain scams that are going on in certain areas of the country. I would say to seek a site out. You know how you can sign up to get on like an email list, and typically I believe as long as you're affiliated with some sort of insurance company, brokerage or something, then they can put you on that list. And they do have like contacts for reporting. For sure, the National Insurance Crime Bureau, National Association of Special Investigative Units. I don't know if that's just primarily for us or not, but I know that you can follow. Will give like a hotline number or for you to call. There are various places where you could make that report, because they're looking for what is the next scheme, what is the next scam, and trying to collect that information and start to follow some of those leads.
I think another thing with 2020 is, if there aren't enough, is we have COVID, and we're also wrestling with an abnormally highly active storm season, especially down here in the coast. Right. And so we've had back to back hurricanes. And, whenever these storms blow through, unfortunately, there's a higher than normal level of activity with bad contractors. I remember hearing stories, years ago where, an insured would get a knock on the door and say, hey, we repaired this and this and this, and, you owe us this money and you need to file a claim because we've already done the work. And so kind of coercing somebody into filing a claim because they feel like otherwise they owe the money for it. And so it's really, because to your point, Matthew, our customers look to us on, hey, how do I handle this, what do I do? And encouraging them to seek out again, verifiable vendors. Is this someone that has a Better Business Bureau profile? Is this somebody that is on an approved list with your carrier in terms of a preferred, contractor? Is this somebody who, there's all of these varying things that, just best practices,
because they will purport themselves to be affiliated with insurance companies. They do that all the time. They'll say that they're with your insurance company or an insurance company to try to lend credibility to their name.
And then they say things like, well, if you use us, then your deductible will be waived, and all of these.
Not a good sign. That's definitely not a good sign. That's never a good sign.
I can imagine in of course,
Woo.
that's a little bit closer to the Gulf than Dallas, but it's probably, really,
Yes.
and again, most of these storms have been making landfall somewhere between, Houston and New Orleans. Lake Charles, of course, took a couple
And
hits
New
here. But other than the like leaving the deductible, are there other like dead ringers that you know of that should automatically be like a red light?
from a property standpoint.
Yeah, I get from a property standpoint that you can kind of think of. I mean, obviously there's, the indicators on the website are there for a reason. But, it's just being wise and to your point about these economic downturns, even on the commercial side,
I love the contractor who always comes in and goes, I can get you a new roof. Right?
Well, say that. I got your neighbor a new roof.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, see me over here.
Yeah. People feel entitled, and I think that's a big issue that we face is, we talk about victimless versus, crimes. These people probably won't snatch a purse or break into a house, but you have a 20-year insured who says, I feel like I'm due. Like, I've been with you a long time. I'm, this is something that, there's no harm. It's, something that I should be receiving. And so, again, unfortunately, that participation.
And that's a philosophy that we struggle with because it's like you say, it's the perception and it becomes kind of like a group think. Like if the majority of people don't think there's anything wrong with that approach or that concept of, I put my money in, it's time for it to pay off. And it's hard for people to feel like there's something wrong with that mind frame if everyone that they know thinks that same way. That's like a common, mentality that we're challenged with in this industry to get over that.
Yeah. Have you seen just in your kind of like personal frame of reference or even something that you might have gotten from, other people that you work alongside of in your role within the industry, have you seen, is it an uptick in more claims being filed, or is it an uptick in, say, like the magnitude of claims being filed? I always thought that COVID was going to be a high frequency, low severity event in terms of kind of obviously we're taking a communicable disease issue and we're translating it into, whether it be property claims or whatnot. But am I off base there, or does that sound kind of off the course?
For me, the specialty that I'm in, medical provider, what's happened is, because of COVID, we're having less claims. Like there's a period of time because of just people's, inability to move around or unwillingness to move around. You've got less vehicles on the road, you've got less accidents. And so what what's caused ultimately is that you've reduced the revenue of plaintiff attorneys in terms of just the volume of claims is less than it was. So now they're looking for ways to increase the value of the claims and the pending lawsuits that they currently have. So they have to try to look for ways to get that lost revenue. And so one of the big issues that's blowing up, and you'll see a lot about this, is like what they're calling telemedicine or telefraud. And primarily what kind of the source of this was basically
We might have lost her for a second.
Our government reduced because of the pandemic. The restrictions and things that were required or reduced or lax. Now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, give it a go. I think you started to break up when you started to say telemedicine.
Okay. Yes, telemedicine. So what happened was the government like reduced the restrictions and all of the like the regulations around it to accommodate, us because of the situation that we're in. And so it's basically allowed all these, for lack of a better word, bad actors to enter into the telemedicine sphere. And so it's just created an opportunity for just misrepresentation of what's going on, and whether or not this telemedicine is actually occurring, what is actually occurring, what is being billed for. And it's just another way to kind of like pad claims or build up claims, like again, to offset the actual volume of claims that COVID caused to be reduced. So that's kind of going to be it's going to be a big thing, because like I said, you've got a lot of, and especially like in first party states, like where you're at, New Jersey, New York, Florida, any place that has a big no fault exposure, that's going to be a real problem in those areas long term.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm
I
sorry.
and that's also interesting from the standpoint of it's not new, but I mean it's relatively new in terms of how widely used it was, and it's
Yes,
exploded not just in terms of, you know, not just in terms of like, auto medical claims or anything like that. I mean, it's just exploded across the board because doctors' offices, you didn't want to
yes,
necessarily go into the doctor's office. So that just
correct.
uptick in volume, or even bigger than a tsunami in volume, creates all kinds of room for that kind of waste, fraud, and excess. I think that's interesting. Yeah.
But
Yeah, to a week.
Mhm. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say a week ago, I saved these stats for this meeting because about a week after I talked to Precious, I sat through a class, and they were basically telling us that pre-COVID telemedicine was a $3 billion a year business with 11% of market share, and where we are now, year to date, it's 250 billion and 46% for NICD.
Wow.
And so it's exploded. And the big issue is that certain carriers don't have the sophisticated detection mechanisms in place yet to figure out how to identify the fraud trends. I mean, we're obviously working on it, but it's going to take some time for us to catch up. But it's just exploded, and it's just this tsunami of all these different things. But we're going to get exploited before we get our hands around it.
Ouch.
Hmm.
But I think about all the checks and balances with like a typical traditional in-person appointment, right? You go to the reception desk, you give them a copy of your ID, your driver's license, they verify that against the insurance card, and those sort of things. And I know, depending on what state you're in, telemedicine can be video call, it may be just a telephone call. You don't truly know who's on the other end of the line.
Nope, you do not. You
Yeah,
do not.
they match the driver's license, prescriptions are just called in, so there's all of these gaps, but what I was thinking with like medical fraud claims, I know that, for example, I specialize in the transportation space, and so trucking insurance, part of the reason the premiums are what they are is because, anytime you turn on the TV, you've got some man standing on the hood of some semi saying, "Have you been hit by a truck?" Because they're deeper pockets, right? Everyone knows that because they're DOT regulated, they've got to carry these jumbo policies. And so there's a temptation
Absolutely.
Oh, I think you're freezing. Did we lose her?
Maybe we'll see. We'll get her back.
Okay.
So I think you were saying the DOT is like the deeper pocket, and that's what they go after, right?
Well, yeah, because, if you just get hit by just a random motorist, you don't know if they've got state minimum limits or if they've got an umbrella. You're not sure potentially how many dollars, you can pursue and what the payout would be. With commercial vehicles, people pretty well know that they've got to carry, 750,000 minimum. And so that just makes it, attractive. So when you get into kind of overworking some of these injuries, if you get tapped by a big rig, all of a sudden that's like, you're going to the chiropractor every other day for a massage because that there's those pockets to get into. But now with elective surgeries are down because of, the hospitals are filled up with COVID. Do you see as much kind of over treatment as you did pre-COVID?
Well, the big issue with the elective surgeries is that a lot of times these types of surgeries are done in surgery centers as opposed to hospitals. And so what has created a big gap there is that some of these orders that these state governments put out did not cover the surgery centers.
Interesting.
So that left them with still the option to do those procedures or to say they did those procedures during COVID. I mean, we have a lot of cases where that's being challenged because our thought process is, well, there was an order that said that you couldn't do X, Y, and Z, but then we've been given, kind of more information as NICB's looked into it further, that these restrictions, there was kind of a gray area that allows these doctors to say, well, we have the discretion to determine whether or not, and as long as the patient felt safe and as long as we followed safety protocols and we were able to proceed with these procedures. Now, Precious, I come from a world where some of these procedures just aren't happening regardless of what it says on the paper.
Oh, wow.
So it's not that
we're breaking up again.
Get it or not.
Yep. I was gonna say the other crossover here I think is workers' comp, right? Like workers' comp is a big one too, because kind of like what Judith was saying with having to either depose or question someone via Zoom call or something like that. You can't necessarily get a real feel for if they're compensating, if they're not compensating. I mean, you could have them walk on a camera or something like that remotely, but you're not necessarily going to be able to get an accurate feel for whether or not they're milking it, But yeah, we keep losing you, Judith. I'm sorry.
Did they do it at all?
Yeah. But yeah, it's really tough to kind of get that human identification of whether or not that person is actually telling you the truth or whether their body is telling you the truth, right? Oh, having trouble getting back in. We got you now, I think.
Okay. Can you see me?
We can see.
Yeah, we got you.
I'm sorry.
That's
sorry,
okay.
guys. We were having a good talk there about these surgery centers. And like I was saying, in some cases, it's not about whether or not they could have had the procedure. It's did they actually have it?
Yeah. And that's something also I'm not really necessarily sure where the broker fits into that chain, right? I mean,
we talked about that. That's kind of hard for me to tie into a way that this goes beyond. This is more of a bad actor thing that goes beyond, you know what I mean? That where they come in or where they could, there's really no prevention for some of this third party stuff that goes on. Another thing I wanted to be sure to mention, it was very timely for, Precious to mention the commercial trucking thing. And you might be aware of this. All you need to Google is New Orleans staged accident ring. Literally 2 weeks ago, an attorney in New Orleans was indicted in this huge over 2-year federal investigation where over 35 people to date have been indicted in a staged accident ring targeting semi trucks. And I've been involved in it for a year. I found out about it about a year ago. And at the time that I got involved, the first indictment, there was 5 people, and literally we're up to 33 people with an attorney and supposedly more attorneys to come. That's a good one to watch, Precious, but it just goes to show you the level of sophistication and planning and targeting of these large commercial semi-policies.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is really scary. I mean, it really points to I mean, even if the broker doesn't fit in terms of, say, like the auto liability loss after the accident has happened, they do fit into the procedure or into the process of, let's stop the claim from happening before it happens, right? So that's more of the risk management part of the job. Advocating for dash cams, even if they're not required by law, advocating for, GPS tracking within the vehicles, even if it's not required by law or by the insurance company, all those little added things. And in addition to a really robust post-accident or incident report that the driver or the supervisor and the supervisor fill out afterward, I think can all, go a long way to helping at least mitigate some of this stuff from being able to get through, or maybe even shining a light on it. That anything that can happen. I mean, Judith, I don't know if you heard it, but before I was saying that, this also kind of like hits on the workers' comp side of it, where when, you have a claimant who is nursing an injury or otherwise, over manifesting is another word that you could say. It's tough to be able to figure that out remotely. But if you've done your steps in the process ahead of time, some of these things are literally would have to be like 1 in a billion shot type of accidents to have caused the damage that they caused, or at least is being alleged. But we've been enjoying. So we had one super fan on earlier. I think he's still on, Tony. He's been here 4 weeks in a row. We also got Matt Maxwell checking in just to let us know that we're here. Yeah,
he's fun.
So thank you, Matt. Thank you for Tony for being regulars here.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting to talk about kind of where this is going to go. I mean, have you guys made any investments in any technology or maybe deeper into certain technologies that you hadn't invested in before, in order to kind of, I think you said you have to be bit by it first, and then you kind of learn by the pain of it, and then you have to kind of move forward. But, what are some of the moving mechanisms that you guys are involved in right now?
Yeah, everything that we have, I think, was already in place. A fraud tool. It's like a digital fraud tool. I don't know how much I can talk about it in terms of, like, you know what I mean, the parameters of what it's designed to do, but it's kind of like data mining, I guess, maybe. Kind of along those lines, you know what I'm saying? It might, I don't know, it might be proprietary. I get too far. Right.
Well, as long as you don't have Mark Zuckerberg on speed dial, I think. At least not recently. But yeah, no, I think that's also something that might be a silver lining here, right? Precious, is just the data environment that we're living in nowadays, in terms of being able to kind of bridge that divide.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, what I think.
We might have gotten a funny comment out of it.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm having.
No, it's understood. But it's I remember back when I was in school and I was studying psychology, right? So I was taking a course and I was reading all the ins and outs. And then every time I came across people on my daily walk, I'm like, I know about you. I just read a chapter. So it's like there's this temptation to act on things that you think that you know, right? And so as an agent or broker, recognizing that our role is, it's very close to it, but we're not directly involved in it. And so, kind of like the police say, okay, well, we're looking for this person. If you see them, do not approach. like call.
Yeah, call the authorities.
So the goal here isn't for you to tackle your insurance and say, I know what you're doing. The gig is up.
Right.
Citizen's arrest. I'm apprehending you. I'm turning you over, you know. But I do think that, again, a takeaway from the agent's office is, we tend to think that the only time that we can provide feedback is during first notice of loss, but if something else is brought across your, desk or to your attention,
Yes.
most situations you have details on how to get a hold of whoever the claim handler is. And so, if you let them know that, I saw, this happened. And of course, this is just, you relaying information that would be helpful, for someone to know. For example, someone just had, again, on the PNC side, house fire, but they just told you that they're having financial struggles. That's material. Somebody needs to be made aware that they just lost their job, they're going through a divorce, and then all of a sudden things are, so we do have a role, to your point earlier, to protect the entire, ecosystem, because it doesn't take much to, the ripple effect, right? Because all of a sudden when loss ratios get out of hand, profitability change, rates change, and it becomes the same way shoplifters raise prices for everyone. These sort of, claims, the promise is there for people who are genuinely entitled to it. But, the better that we can get a grasp and understand what our role is in helping defend the purse, it just makes, awareness is really the best that we can hope that, introducing, agents and brokers that didn't know that they had any sort of, power,
That's right.
So I think there's a.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. That also seems to take that offering kind of like full rounded in terms of the sales and the service aspect of it, right? Like a lot of brokers who just think that their role is to sell, they're going to miss this. And it's not necessarily an E&O exposure, but it can be a PR exposure. I mean, if you have 1, 2, 3 of these types of claimants, I mean, especially if you have a homogeneous book of business and some of them are comparing notes or something like that. I mean, it can come back to bite you if you're not paying attention. So that's also something to think about. Judith is nodding like I just testified in front of the church congregation. Am I onto something here?
You're onto something. I've had family members and family members, and it's something that's been perpetuated by this family member that's in this agency, and then when they were able to get away with it, then it's like, hey, let me show you how this is done. And that's what was uncovered when we uncovered it. So that's a key point. And to Precious's point, when I was at State Farm, that was one of the things as an investigator on a questionable claim. My first call was to the agent's office to talk to who knows these people. What do you know about them? Give me some background. I mean, who? Do you have notes from your conversations with them? What's going on with them? Depending on the type of claim it was, but those are definitely those conversations, those relationships, that awareness that I wouldn't have is very, was very critical sometimes in kind of filling in some holes.
Awesome.
I've received those calls.
Yeah.
When I was, again, a phone call like SIU's on the line.
Yeah.
Policy. And you're like, oh, what did they do?
Yeah.
And even something as simple, to your point, Matthew, when people recognize you as being the weakest link, and all of a sudden they see you, and all of a sudden everybody wants to do, a BOR to your office.
Oh yeah.
It's not because you all of a sudden become a stellar salesperson. It's because they heard that if you get in here, he'll write it, and then you can double back and collect on it. And unfortunately, those things, like you said, it spreads, a bigger issue.
Oh, and I would be remiss to say that I haven't played that game, at least to a small part, where, I might not necessarily broach that part of the conversation, but when it comes up, I'll see where it goes. But, that conversation typically goes somewhere along the line of, well, I heard something that was happening with my current broker. And you're like, yeah, they're having some problems with some of their clients that might be filing some fraudulent claims and things like that. And there's just this kind of, smudge that follows you now where, some of your clients who are legitimately concerned about, the PR and the image aspect of things, they'll distance themselves from you if you have some of that stuff going on. And granted, it can be something that maybe you had absolutely no control over, but at the same time, don't, shoot yourself in the foot by just turning a blind eye to it and think it's not going to end up biting you. So be warned. Be warned. It can come around. All right, cool. Judith, I want to thank you for your time. I know we had some connection issues, but look, I think this was
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I mean, you're not out there on the fiber optic line, so we can't hold that against you. But that being said, I want to give you a quick plug. How can people connect with you if you want to be connected with, or where can they find more information about USAA at?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. My name, Judith Smalls, LinkedIn. I think I'm connected with both you, Matthew, and Precious on there. And USAA.com. It's a great company to work for. So if you're interested in that, go online. LinkedIn alerts for any opportunity.
We ran into a little bit of an issue, but yeah, definitely. I'm gonna reiterate your plug, Judith. Anyone who is out there looking, if you were say like on the underwriting side or on the carrier side, even if you're looking for like an inside sales position, USAA is absolutely fantastic. Anyone who's outside the CPCU family, USAA is a huge partner of the CPCU Society. Tons of CPCUs work at USAA and have gotten their CPCU as a result of working at USAA. So they're a great champion of the designation and the society. So definitely check it out if you are kind of looking for a spot somewhere. I want to thank Judith again. Precious, any kind of parting thoughts or anything like that?
So, obviously with USAA, but I'll also put in the plug for the Houston chapter for the CPCU Society is a fantastic chapter. Obviously, we're here in Texas together and we support very closely. Tons of wonderful people. So if you are a current CPCU and you're not engaged in the chapter, I would recommend that you connect with Judith and find an opportunity on where to plug in. Even right now with social distancing, we're all finding ways to create online content and again, just stay connected and stay plugged in. So yeah, obviously, that's something that's near and dear to our hearts, to make sure that anyone in Houston Metro, again, if you haven't been active, there's no time like the present. It's almost the first of the year again. So jump right. Get involved.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, thank you, Judith. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you guys for the invitation. I had a good time.
Our pleasure.
Have a good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.